Milos Astro Lanes.
If there's one thing I really dislike about modern gaming, is that more often than not studios can be far too risk averse. For every Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto which gets released these days, there's a ton of other clones and generic alternatives which are released to try and tap into that same market share. It wasn't always this bad, however. If there's one thing I loved about the PS1 and N64 era, it was that the cost of producing games was nowhere near the level it's at today. This allowed many studios to balance their books by releasing the more popular series with some weird and wonderful games thrown together with a riskier strategy, but it was one which led to some incredible creativity and games which on paper sounded dreadful but turned out to be awesome. Just take Space Station Silicon Valley as a prime example. Milos Astro Lanes was developed by Player One, who started work on the project after finishing the generally positively received Robotron 64. Published by Crave Entertainment in late '98 in North America and summer '99 in Europe, the game was due to have a Japanese release being published by Capcom under the title Space Bowler Milo. However, Capcom's interest faded due to the low N64 sales figures in Japan and the game's poor sales figures in the rest of the world. The concept for the game is actually one of those games which you just know wouldn't sell huge amounts, but the idea is actually quite cool. In the 22nd century, the world has become obsessed with the Astro games, which is essentially space bowling. It pulls huge ratings on television across the galaxy, and the players make up personalities from across the universe. Milo, the game's titular character, decides he wants to win the Astro Light Trophy, which is the highest cup across the vast expanse that is space. Not much more is said about the storyline or why you can pick one of the many other characters to try and win the Astro Light Cup. The other characters in the game have very little backstory. However, if you do delve into the instruction manual, you'll come across some weird information about them and how they interlink with one another. Trust me, it's not Shakespeare, so all you really need to know is that they all want to win the Astro Light Cup. They're a mix of friends and rivals, and there's some weird love triangle thing going on which has no place in the game. Jumping into the game itself, that's where things get a lot more interesting. While Super Bowling and Brunswick Bowling try to keep a more serious take on bowling for the N64, Milos Astro Lanes goes for something far wackier. The game's lanes take place in futuristic and often living places, so don't be surprised to see huge craters, alien inhabitants, and elemental effects lighting up the lanes as you bowl. Add to this, there's a range of different balls to choose from and power-ups, which is where things really do come to life and stand out, for better or for worse. You see, the power-ups in the game add a really cool concept, but they are massively overpowered. When it's your turn to bowl, you have an attacking power-up, which you'll collect by hitting the coloured stars which are spread across the lanes. These allow you to power up your shot on demand, and you could, for example, make your ball split into 3 to give you an almost spray shot, or you could make your ball gigantic so it will smash anything in its path. And for those with filthy minds, yes, I am still talking about bowling balls. That's not where the power-ups stop, however. When it's your opponent's turn to roll, you can also use defensive power-ups, which could, for example, cover your opponent's ball in gunk to slow it down, and yes, I did just say gunk, or it might make your opponent's ball become tiny, making it harder for them to knock down pins. It's this attack and defensive mechanic which gives the game an interesting twist and makes it just as important to concentrate when you're playing as it is when your opponent is bowling. You can also counter each other's power-ups too, which can lead to some pretty hilarious battles as you keep throwing specials at one another in an attempt to be the victor. The problem, however, is that even on the harder levels of the game, your opponents really don't have much aggression. That allows you to often find a sweet spot to keep spamming, with little comeback from your opponent. Then when it's their turn, you can decimate them with all of your power-ups, resulting in them getting some pathetic scores and making it a breeze to win every time. The game is split into cups which become progressively harder, but never reach anything which a normal player would find a challenge. After defeating each lane's champion, you then need to redo the lane with what is called a bonus round. In these bonus rounds, you have no opponent, but you have many more pins spread across the lane, and you have 3 balls and power-ups to knock them all down. Again though, the challenge isn't really great. and if you can hit a good shot with the giant ball, then you can pretty much complete all of these so-called challenges the first time that you play them. Progressing through the cup system, you'll unlock new lanes to play, and this adds some spice to the multiplayer offering. Sure, the game will probably take you around 6 or 7 hours to complete in the single player mode, but it's the game's multiplayer where you'll likely find the most enjoyment. The aforementioned battles with specials are much more interesting when you're playing with someone who knows the mechanics of the game and what the specials do, which in a way almost takes the game away from being a bowling experience to a mental battle of wit. The problem you're likely to have, however, is that in this day and age, finding someone who's willing to put the hours into playing the game to learn how the mechanics work is likely to be near impossible with so many better multiplayer games available. It's unfortunate that the developer promised so much before the game's release. There were announcements of huge number of lanes, create your own worlds, and much more physics-based gameplay than actually ended up being delivered. The overall gameplay experience feels shallow, and like it could have done with a few more months in development and more content being added to the game. The graphics are sure to divide opinion. Many will look at this and see a rough around the edges blocky mess with poor animation levels and uninspired characters. I, however, do give the game some credit. I actually agree with IGN that the game has an almost Jetsons-like feel to it. The vibrant colours and aliens add some life into what would have been an otherwise bland experience. The lanes themselves, although limited, are quite cool to look at, but I would have liked some more depth to the backgrounds, which are essentially generic space views. Rounding off the game's package is the music, which is just about above average. Sure, it's nothing along the lines of the classics from Grant Kirkhope, but what's here is completely non-offensive, almost cartoon-like blend of background ditties. You'll likely not notice them when playing, so they won't distract you from playing or become annoying during the long matchups that you're likely to have. And the game's sound effects too also do the job. There's a nice mix of wacky elemental sounds, but I would have liked more voice work from the announcer and more depth to the reactions from the players in the game. It's not bad, it just could have been fleshed out a little more. Overall, Milos Astro Lanes could simply be described as a great concept, but one which had below par execution. Is it a bad game? Well, no, not really, but it's not a game which you'll keep coming back to. The game does have some engrossing moments, and the special powers keep things feeling fresh far longer than they should have, but for anyone picking up this game on the cheap, you'll likely get a good 10 hours or so gameplay out of it if you do stick with it start to finish. And so for today's topic of conversation, I'd love to know any memories you have of the game. My local game shop back in the day very rarely had this title available, even used, and so by the time I actually played the game, it was probably about a year or so after it was released here in Europe, by which time there were much better games available, and it did make this game perhaps look even more dated and old hat than it actually was. So let me know your thoughts and feelings, opinions and ratings in the comment section down below, and until next time.